Hi, and welcome to the OrasiLabs webinar, where we will discuss how OrasiLabs can help healthcare organizations standardize training and onboard faster with virtual technology. My name is Karen Spencer, and I have Joe Schultz also joining me today. I will kick us off with a brief introduction to OrasiLabs and a high-level overview of what OrasiLabs is and how it benefits healthcare organizations. Then we'll move into a demo where Joe will demonstrate how OrasiLabs can be used to deliver your medical software application training. And I will mention, although in this webinar, we will talk about OrasiLabs in the context of healthcare, most of this does apply to other audiences. So if you can, certainly stick around. You can also look for webinars that we did for a training provider audience and also one for software companies if that is a better fit. And Joe, one thing I was going to mention, certainly as I said, the focus today is healthcare companies. So I thought we'd start by, just explaining high level a few of the use cases that we've seen with healthcare organizations specifically. The one I'm, of course, familiar with is a large hospital system that had several hundred, or they do every year, have several hundred interns come in about the May-June timeframe, and all of those interns need onboarding. Of course, that onboarding does include training on the Epic application. And this organization had a need to quickly pivot from their in-person training to delivering that Epic training in a remote situation. And of course, anytime you're training, effectively training anyone on Epic software, you want your students to have their hands on that keyboard, practice what they're learning. And what this organization quickly realized is that the main thing they were concerned about in a virtual setting was how would the instructor easily see what the students were doing in that Epic application. So of course they can provide effective assistance. And not just one student at a time, of course, but the ability to get a view into all of those students' desktops at once to keep a pulse on how things are going. So that's certainly one use case I've seen in healthcare. I was curious, Joe, what are some of the use cases you've seen recently?
Well, most of the healthcare organizations that are using our tool, it's a very similar kind of use pattern. That over-the-shoulder capability that you mentioned, is always the big bang for them. One of my other customers, that's really important to them because it's a distributed hospital complex. So they don't even have a central facility that everybody can come to because they've got hospitals all over the region. And so this is going to let them, rather than sending an instructor around every classroom and repeating the same class 12 times in 12 different geographic locations, they can have one class then and have all these remote employees, attend through OrasiLabs. It'll save the instructor traveling, or in some cases, the students traveling, which then takes them out of the field for 2 or 3 days.
Right. Right, exactly. Okay, perfect. That makes sense. Then with those in mind, let's get started with just a brief overview in terms of what is OrasiLabs. Now, OrasiLabs allows you to create inexpensive, hands-on, I forgot to stop my camera.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. I was trying to decide whether I should turn mine off or not.
All right, I'm going to stop the video. I think the transition was fine. I think it's just right here.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. OrasiLabs allows you to create inexpensive, hands-on training environments in the cloud. Now, these environments can be as simple as a browser, or could be multi-server environment, really just depending on what application you are teaching. OrasiLabs then quickly spins up personalized copies for each student in each class. And the nice thing here is students only need a browser and an internet connection to access their own dedicated training environment. And each lab is set up with exactly what the student needs for hands-on participation. Now, OrasiLabs can be used for any type of training event, including on-site or virtual instructor-led classes. Could be a virtual on-demand class, hands-on workshop, and even large group seminars. And in all those cases, students can quickly and easily use their OrasiLabs environment to practice those skills being taught. And Joseph, we're going to talk about benefits next. Some of the benefits that we've seen healthcare organizations realize is, I wanted to mention that in the example earlier of the hospital system training those new interns, in that case, the ability for students to participate in the training without any special equipment or any special installs was extremely important. As I mentioned, these were new hires. These were new interns that had just been hired. And in many cases, those students were participating on personal devices. In many cases, they were participating from temporary housing. So really only needing a browser and an internet connection and no other setup made that training quite feasible. In thinking about some of the benefits that you've seen with different healthcare groups, is there anything that stands out for you?
Well, I think it's just variations on what you just said. The whole point is with like new employee onboarding, you don't have to worry about the setup as much, right? So, in addition to not needing to set their PC up and such, one of my customers, in fact, is using OrasiLabs just to avoid having to even send them a PC, because sometimes it might take 2 or 3 weeks for a machine to get provisioned to send out to a new employee. And of course, they have to have certain, security restrictions in place to protect the data on the back end. So rather than have the employee sit there and twiddle their thumbs for 3 weeks waiting for the machine to show up, OrasiLabs lets them set up all the security environment on our end, and then the employee can just attend from a personal machine. So they can start their training the first day that they're an employee, even if they haven't gotten their corporate laptop yet.
Oh, that's great. That's perfect. So get started right away. Great. So keeping those things in mind, just a brief look then at some of the other benefits that we've seen. Some of those we've already mentioned. I will say that OrasiLabs leverages the AWS cloud. We'll talk about that a couple of times here, but it does make this extremely cost effective. So it's an extremely cost effective way to reach more students. Joe talked earlier in that example about reaching those students, regardless of where they're located. And of course, reaching more students will drive that product adoption of your software, your healthcare software application training, and of course, increase that user productivity. We've mentioned this over the shoulder view. Joe will show that certainly in a demo, but with that, even with remote students, instructors can better assess who understands the material and who might need a little bit more assistance. Joe mentioned this earlier, certainly with the setup time, most of our customers state that they save a considerable amount of time since everyone's environment is set up with exactly what the students need for class, and everyone's environment is exactly the same. So it saves the instructor time before class, and it also saves the instructor time during class because they know exactly what that environment looks like. We realize that for many organizations, your training demand can vary based on many factors. Maybe your training increases when you need to upskill around a new release of your medical records application, or maybe it's similar to what I talked about earlier, is that you need it, just once or twice a year when you onboard new interns. Either of those, anywhere in between is fine. With OrasiLabs, you pay for only what you use, and you can easily scale up or down depending on your needs. I mentioned that we're built on AWS cloud, and so certainly moving those training environments to the cloud can be cost effective, certainly scalable, but cloud providers can be quite complex and overwhelming. And one of the benefits here is we remove that complexity with an interface built specifically for training. And you'll see that certainly when we get into Joe's demo. So let's now talk about a little bit about how does OrasiLabs work, and then Joe will take us through this in a little bit more detail. But as an instructor, when I'm ready to begin teaching, I simply start the class, which is going to allow students to log in. Now, as an instructor, I can have my own lab for any instructional activity like presentations or demonstrations. I can also broadcast my lab image to the students so they can watch what I'm doing. So as I teach the class, I can broadcast my image. When it's time for students to work on their own or on their activities, they can open their dedicated lab for their hands-on practicing. So at this point, they're interacting with a cloud resource just as if it was installed local. And as I mentioned earlier, since the environment was created ahead of time, it has everything needed and everything set up to perfectly match those course materials. And then as the students work on their own labs, the instructor can then monitor those students. So the instructor can watch what students are doing. As I mentioned, we call this our over-the-shoulder view, but this view lets me see live thumbnails for as many students as I want to monitor. And I can see who's doing okay, who's stuck, and so on. And we'll take a look at this as we get into the demo. And with that, that's a quick overview of what OrasiLabs is, a little bit about how it works. So Joe, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you so we can take a look and see how this could be used by healthcare organizations.
Okay. Well, thanks, Karen. So I'm going to show you a quick preview of kind of what OrasiLabs looks like, what the interface looks like for both the student and for the instructor. For the student, it all starts with an email. So I'm actually in Outlook here. I'm not in OrasiLabs. I'm in Outlook. And I'm logged in this case, as Charles Darwin, our famous student who's going to learn how to use our medical software. And so Charles has gotten an invitation here in Outlook. It's got information about the class. And all Charles has to do when he's ready to join the class is literally push the big blue button here in the email. So he's just going to click the link and it pops him right into the browser. Our intention with architecting OrasiLabs was to make it very simple and easy, single-click access so that even very non-technical people can use it. Okay, so when Charles is ready to join the conference, all he has to do is press the big green button, and now he's in the electronic classroom. He's able to see now what I, as the instructor, are presenting. And he can also has an audio channel that he can hear what everyone in the room is saying. We also have a built-in chat channel as well. And so, Charles can chat with me as the instructor or any of the other students that are in the class. So it's really easy for Charles to get to join the class, to engage with the instructor, to watch what's going on. But the real value then, as Karen you mentioned earlier, is getting hands-on practice, right? It's all about getting students to practice. So what we also have then is a lab for Charles to use to do his own work. So he can watch me, and when it comes time for him to practice, what he would do is probably put me in a picture view. That puts the instructor broadcast here in a little movable, resizable window. And then Charles can open up his lab in the background and actually start following along with the exercise. So like in this case, you can see I'm at the Epic sign-in screen, and I would now, as an instructor in the foreground, I'd be showing them what to do, and the student would then be following along here in their own lab. So it's, a couple of clicks and the student is in the class portal. They're able to interact with the instructor, and then they're able to do their own exercises. Now, if Charles runs into trouble, he's got a couple of options, right? He can mention something. He can, say something verbally on the audio channel. He could chat, pop open the chat window real quick and chat with the instructor. Or he can raise his hand electronically and ask for help. So if I raise my hand, now the instructor is getting a notice that says that Charles needs some help, and they would know to help him out. So the whole point is that, if Charles gets stuck, he can ask for help quickly and easily in a variety of different methods. So that's really all there is to the student interface. It's very easy to get into, very easy to access the lab and start practicing, and even easy to ask for help if they need to. Now, from the instructor point of view, all of this has been happening at Charles's location, wherever Charles is. But as an instructor, I need to watch them. I need to see them. So I'm going to pop over now into the instructor view here, Karen. And this is what the instructor's been seeing. So while Charles has been doing his exercise, I'm presenting in one window, but I can also open up this Student Labs tab. And this is that over-the-shoulder view that you mentioned earlier, Karen. So this is where I can see all the students who are logged into the class, whether they're active or not, by the color of their little circle in front of their name. And then if I actually want to see what they're doing, I can just watch them, either one or any subset that I want to keep an eye on. And I see a thumbnail, live action thumbnail of exactly what that person's doing in real time. So this is Charles' screen we were looking at just a minute ago. And I can also see that Florence Nightingale is logged in, and she's starting to navigate through the Epic menu there and try and log in, for example. And I don't mean to burst your bubble, anybody watching this webinar, but it's not really Florence Nightingale. It's actually Karen on the back end there.
Thanks, Joe.
Exactly. Give away your secrets. But as an instructor, then I can see what's happening. So as I'm instructing, maybe I keep this view up over on the side all the time, and I can see exactly what students are doing. I can see if maybe they're going astray or somebody's not doing something. Like in this example, I can see that Sigmund Freud's not even logged in yet. So maybe I want to send a private chat to Sigmund and say, hey, what's going on? You know, do you need some help? Whatever. You can also have multiple instructors, in fact, Karen. So, you know, I could be teaching, and then, you know, Karen could be logged in as a secondary instructor, and she could be working with Sigmund in the background while I'm teaching the rest of the class. So lots of ways to use this interface to help students out. Now, if I'm working away, if the students are working away and they get really stuck and don't know what to do next, I can even dive into those sessions and help them out. So for example, I can expand a lab, and now I'm looking at Charles's screen. I could be talking to him or chatting with him about what he's supposed to be doing. But if he's really lost, I can go up here in the top left corner and I can unlock Charles's session. And now I have mouse and keyboard control over this session. So I could be saying, well, what I wanted you to do is type in here, Presbyterian, and look for Presbyterian healthcare. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And so I can kind of guide Charles through the process and help him out if I need to. And of course, you know, he's gotten a notice that I was taking over his machine, and he can see what I'm doing as well. So, it's all above board in terms of security. And so then when I'm finished helping Charles, I'd probably just collapse that back down, and now I'd look for the next student to see who else has trouble. I can also even pop open the participant list, and I can manage the electronic queue here and see who's raised their hand, who's asked for help. Once I've helped them out, I can dismiss their request and then wait for the next request or wait for somebody else to need something. So it's a real, very easy to use interface for the instructor as well, both in presenting and in monitoring the students, either individually or as a group. And one thing I'll mention, Karen, about these labs, we've talked a little bit about security earlier, but remember that the student is connecting to these labs, which are then connecting to the systems. So when Florence Nightingale, for example, is here navigating to the community healthcare website or whatever it might be, that connection's actually happening through our lab. So there's no data being transmitted to the student's PC directly at all. In fact, the access from the lab here to the community healthcare hospital data center, for example, is all a separate connection that we can set up and secure in any way that the customer needs to have done. So it's a very secure environment when dealing with this, highly confidential PPI kind of data that people might have to use.
Oh yeah, I think that's actually a really good distinction, Joe, especially for, like you say, this healthcare data.
Yeah, and it goes back to that example I mentioned a minute ago, where they're having customers having new hires who don't even have a corporate laptop yet. This is a way that they can train them because the security is all handled on our end, and the student could just be in a library on a public PC and it wouldn't make any difference because they have no direct access to those systems. And so that's what OrasiLabs is all about. It's designed to be, as I've said several times now, really simple, single-click kind of environment, so that non-technical people can easily be both an instructor and or a student without having to, learn all about how the cloud works and how to push all the Amazon buttons. It's literally just a matter of pushing the big start and stop buttons in the right places, and you're ready to go.
Great, Joe. That was great. Thanks. One question I had, I mentioned the different types of training and workshops and whatnot that OrasiLabs could be used for. You were talking about usage in terms of things like multiple instructors. So how does that, or do those things impact pricing? Like if you could just give us a high level overview in terms of how OrasiLabs pricing works.
Well, everything in OrasiLabs is based on consumption. So essentially, you pay for what you use. You don't have to pay to license instructors or to sign up students. You don't start getting charged until they log on. And then if you have 20 people in a class for 2 hours, that's 40 hours of usage, and you pay for 40 hours, whatever that is. So you can even sign up 100 people, and if only 12 show, you only pay for the 12 that show up. It's really easy, meant to be very flexible for customers. We do have a pay-as-you-go kind of model where you don't have to commit to anything. And then we also have some annual subscriptions that help bring the price down by pre-purchasing blocks of time.
Sure. Okay, great. That helps. Thanks so much for that. I think that's what we had today. We talked about a couple of healthcare use cases that Joe and I have seen, kind of set the stage there. We then talked about some high-level benefits and an overview of OrasiLabs, and then Joe showed in real time kind of how we've seen healthcare organization use OrasiLabs. So hopefully that gave you some insight, and we really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you.